Over the past decade, financial stress hasn't disappeared from the system, it's been absorbed. When shocks emerged, the sovereign stepped in. During the global financial crisis, and again during the pandemic, the U.S. government expanded its balance sheet aggressively. Deficits widened, transfers increased, and the system stabilized. That model worked because it relied on a simple assumption. The sovereign had the capacity to absorb stress. Today, that assumption is beginning to change. Federal debt has grown significantly, and interest costs are rising. This doesn't mean an immediate crisis, but it does signal something more subtle and more important. The sovereign is no longer expanding from a position of strength. It's operating under increasing constraint. And when that happens, stress doesn't disappear. It moves. In the debt triad framework, financial stability depends on three pillars: the sovereign, the corporate sector, and households. For years, the sovereign pillar acted as the primary shock absorber. When pressure built elsewhere, it stepped in to contain it. But as that capacity tightens, the system begins to reconfigure. The key question is not whether stress exists, it's where it goes. What we are beginning to see is a shift in the transmission of that stress from the federal level down to the states. This is where the system changes. The United States operates with a structural asymmetry. The federal government can run sustained deficits. States cannot. They are required to balance their budgets annually. That means when funding tightens or costs rise, adjustment happens immediately. There is no delay, there is no absorption, only compression. For several years, that constraint was softened by federal support, pandemic care transfers, emergency programs, expanded benefits. But that support has now faded. At the same time, costs are shifting back to the states, particularly in healthcare, food assistance, and administrative requirements. The result is a new phase of fiscal reality. States are now the first point where sovereign constraint becomes economic impact, and that impact is already visible. Healthcare systems are under pressure as Medicaid funding adjusts. Administrative systems are tightening as eligibility requirements increase. Food assistance programs are seeing reduced participation or funding, and state budgets are beginning to show gaps, forcing difficult decisions within a single fiscal cycle. These are not isolated developments. They are early signals of a broader structural shift. But to understand what's happening, you have to look beyond individual policies. You have to look at the mechanics. Because the transmission of stress is not linear. It moves through reinforcing channels. One of those channels is what we can call stealth debt. When states face pressure, they rarely begin with visible cuts. Instead, they defer. Maintenance on roads, water systems, and energy infrastructure gets pushed out. This doesn't show up immediately in deficits, but it accumulates. Over time, it raises costs for businesses, increases expenses for households, and reduces productivity. It's a delayed form of adjustment, but a very real one. Another channel is the municipal bond market. As state finances come under pressure, borrowing conditions begin to shift. Credit quality becomes more uncertain. Borrowing costs rise, and a larger share of revenue is diverted to debt service. That creates a feedback loop. As debt service increases, fiscal space shrinks. And as fiscal space shrinks, the need for further adjustment intensifies. There's also a competitive dynamic. States are not closed systems. As fiscal pressure leads to higher taxes or reduced services, more mobile households and businesses may relocate. That reduces the tax base, and it concentrates the burden on those who remain. The result is uneven stress. Stronger regions adapt, while more vulnerable ones face deeper compression. Then there's the labor channel. Under normal conditions, the public sector acts as a stabilizer. But under fiscal compression, it becomes procyclical. Hiring freezes, layoffs, and reduced services occur at the same time the economy is weakening. Instead of cushioning the system, it amplifies the pressure. And as all of this unfolds, the burden doesn't disappear. It shifts outward into what we can call the shadow safety net. Nonprofits, food banks, and community health systems begin to absorb what the state can no longer support. But they are facing the same constraints: rising demand, limited funding, and finite capacity. They were never designed to replace the state. Yet they are increasingly filling that role. This is where the system becomes fragile, because when the shadow safety net reaches its limits, the effects feed back into the broader economy. Lower productivity, higher long-term costs, weaker household resilience, and greater systemic risk. This is the key shift in the debt triad. The sovereign is no longer fully absorbing stress. It is transmitting it, from federal balance sheets to state budgets to households. And that changes the structure of the system. Households face reduced support and higher costs. Corporates face weaker demand and greater uncertainty. And the sovereign loses its role as a stabilizer. The system becomes more tightly connected and less resilient. What makes this important is not that a crisis is imminent, it's that the mechanism has changed. Financial stress is no longer being delayed. It is moving earlier in the chain. And it is becoming visible in places that are closer to everyday economic life. So, when we talk about sovereign debt, it's easy to focus on long-term projections. But the real story is happening now, in state budgets under pressure, in infrastructure quietly deteriorating, in households adjusting to reduced support and rising costs. The next phase of financial stress will not begin in treasury markets. It is already unfolding at the state level, and from there, it will continue to move through the system gradually, then more visibly shaping the economic landscape.